And I'm going to go to my magic screen here. So, shalom, oki, tanzi, hest, Kahe, Ampetawashtero, good morning. It is so wonderful that you have all joined us on your precious Saturday morning. I'm Juniper Berries from the Indian Education for All unit at the Montana Office of Public Instruction. Welcome to our Indian Education for All Ethnobotany Saturday workshop series. I'm so excited for this Saturday and next Saturday. Today is just with Mariah Gladstone. I thank you so much for your understanding and your flexibility as Raina had a family emergency that she needed to attend to today. And she and her family can certainly use our healing thoughts and our prayers. And if I get distracted, it's because I am flying solo today and trying to get everyone admitted as well, since we've got folks just jumping in. I want to make sure that they are included. So please make sure to sign in the chat and let us know where you're teaching or working or whose land you're on if you so choose. The sign-in sheet is just if you need renewal units, so do make sure that you get your name on the sign-in sheet. I will be closing that all out at the very end of the workshop, so make sure you get your name on before the end of the workshop. Forgive me if there are any technical issues with anything. I will have limited capacity for problem solving today, so just make a brief note in chat and I will do what I can, but like I said, it's just me today, so I'm doing the best I can. And I will post the sign-in sheet link when I've completed the introduction. And there is a new resource page for the Saturday workshop series, so I've included that in that last post. So if I've just admitted you, I will put the sign-in information in here shortly. In the spirit of healing, I acknowledge and honor the original peoples of the southwestern Montana, Helena, Montana area, the Salish, the Blackfeet, the Kootenai, and other tribal nations, Crow, Northern Cheyenne, Chippewa Cree, Nez Perce, Nakota, Dakota, Little Shell, Assiniboine, Shoshone, and the many indigenous people who call it home, past, present, and future. This will be a little informal today, so thank you so much for your flexibility and understanding. And if you just joined us, you may have missed it. Raina had a family emergency, so just please give her some positive thoughts today. But we will feature Mariah. And we will go until 12:30. After the introduction, Mariah will be sharing with us until about 12 o'clock. I'm super excited about this and what she'll be cooking. And then we will have a brief time to review a few resources and chat about strategies to implement what we have learned today in breakout groups at the end. I so appreciate that you have all chosen to spend your Saturday morning with us. We are recording this for future use. Because of the shortened nature of this, if I can get it captioned, then I will make it available if you want to share it with your classes or your colleagues. And what I may do is just share it out to the group without the caption. So if you do want to use it in your classrooms or with other people, you'd be welcome to. And now to introduce our guest, Mariah Gladstone, who is Blackfeet and Cherokee. She grew up in Northwest Montana. She graduated from Columbia University with a degree in environmental engineering and returned home where she developed and serves as the CEO of IndigiKitchen. You will want to check out the IndigiKitchen website if you have not yet, and it is listed in the resources, and I know Mariah will be talking about it today. Mariah has been recognized as a champion for change through the Center of Native American Youth, a cultural health leader through the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and an MIT Solve Indigenous Communities Fellow. She serves on the board of FAST, Food Access and Sustainability Team Blackfeet, and I do have that link and their incredible resources on the resource sheet as well. Mariah completed her master's degree at SUNY ESF through the Center for Native Peoples and the Environment with Robin Wall Kimmerer. She is currently working on a children's cookbook of Indigenous foods, which I am hoping we can purchase and send to all Montana public school libraries. Welcome, Mariah. Thank you so much. And let's give Mariah some extra love today, as you may know her kitchen and you may not, but she is actually presenting from family's home in Washington. So thank you, Mariah.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. I'm super excited for this today. It should be a pretty low-key workshop. We're not trying to expend too much of your energy here, but hopefully a refresher and a chance to learn some new foods and some new recipes that you may be able to incorporate within the classroom. Again, asking for a little patience because this is not my home kitchen. So I think I have everything I need, but also if I'm hunting for something, it may take me a little bit longer. So for today, we're actually going to do 2 different recipes. We're going to be making a pumpkin, lentil, and sweet potato soup. And we're going to be making some sunflower seed and maple cookies. So we're going to get the soup on to simmer, and lentils and sweet potatoes, of course, take a little while to cook. So that's going to simmer, and then we'll make some easy 3-ingredient cookies. So it'll be super fun, and hopefully a way to talk through some of these foods as we use them, and a chance to just cook up a nice cozy meal at the end of winter.
I'm so sorry, everybody. I forgot to make it the sign-in sheet accessible, so you could actually edit it. If you're already in it, make sure to refresh it so that the permissions update. So I apologize. Like I said, I'm flying without Joan today, so you have to forgive me because Joan is in charge of everything. And I am so delighted to see Carolyn. Good morning, Carolyn. It's so wonderful to see you. Yay.
Oh, I'm changing the color of my lights. That's no good. Give me a second and we'll make this slightly more stable so you guys can actually see what I'm doing. And there we go. That works. We're visible. Okay. So for this recipe, I want to make sure. Okay. I want to make sure I didn't mute myself accidentally. For this recipe, we're actually going to be using some garlic and an onion, and then of course cutting up sweet potatoes. And I have a bit of ginger here as well. So indigenous ingredients are, of course, different things within the onion family, though this big yellow onion is more of a commercial variety. But you could easily do this with wild onions or even chives if you have those. We have a lot of different varieties of wild onions that grow around Montana, so easily accessible to most folks, or they can be pretty easily grown in school gardens or planter box or something outside without a lot of energy, especially in the summertime. So they're pretty easy to find wild onion species. And wild onions, of course, don't have this big bulb, which means that they can be dried very easily. So you can just dry wild onions and store them in a mason jar. And of course, as I said, I'm winging this away from my home kitchen. And so I have just Trader Joe's ingredients today. This is my foraging ground. So I'm just going to peel this onion, then I'm going to cut this into pieces. It'll be the first thing that we saute down. I'm also using garlic, obviously, and let's see. Garlic is another plant within the allium family. So we of course have some wild garlic varieties. Again, this is just commercial garlic. So let's use this. And yeah, we'll just cut into our. So I'm just going to peel this onion. Still a little wet out here. So you'll notice that this is a pumpkin lentil soup, and while pumpkins are an indigenous food, we love our winter squashes. Lentils are not. Lentils originate in the Middle East and are of course very popular in Indian and Nepali cooking. But lentils are very similar to beans nutritionally. So of course our beans, which is one of our 3 sisters. Our 3 sisters are our indigenous polyculture, that's corn, beans, and squash. We can talk a little bit more about the 3 sisters because the 3 sisters grow very well together. The corn forms the support system for the beans to grow up. The beans are a legume, which nourishes the soil. They actually contain nitrogen fixing bacteria in their root nodules, which is super important to soil health, especially as corn and squash are very heavy feeders. And your squash, if you've been in a pumpkin patch, you obviously know that squash spreads out on the ground. And your squash has these great big leaves that shade the rest of the ground and help prevent weeds from coming up. And also those little hairs on the stems of squash kind of help prevent pests from coming and munching on the other plants. So corn, beans, and squash are also cool. They form a complete protein when they're eaten together. So that makes them a great resource. And of course, they occupy very different areas nutritionally. Corn functions much more like a grain. Beans are very protein rich. And your squash is nice and strong in vitamins and minerals and has some good sugars and things like that. So corn, beans, and squash are our three sisters, and they are particularly cool. However, in Montana, we don't have a big bean culture because we have such a cold climate. And so if for folks that have read The Lentil Underground, you may be familiar with some of the issues with soil depletion in the state and a lot of the crops that we've been growing and the ways in which they have affected the soil health over multiple generations of tilling and lack of crop rotation. So lentils are really prided by a lot of folks in the state as a plant that is drought resistant for our climate, but also are a legume that helps re-enrich that soil with nitrogen. So I am going to be using some lentils in this recipe, but you could use like tepary beans, for example. Tepary beans are a really great drought resistant bean. Or you could use any type of beans, really. I would use like a nice mild, like a white cannelli bean, which is going to absorb a lot of the delicious flavors of this meal. So lots of options for substitutions. And of course, look what you have access to. So I have my onions cut up here. I have a big stock pot on the stove, and I can show you guys that in a second. And I have a whole bunch of tiny, tiny garlic cloves because I just started picking apart my garlic here. So here's the trick for garlic cloves. I'm just going to put this sideways, and if I hit them, it essentially acts like a garlic press, but also makes it really easy for me to get this papery part of my garlic off. So that's super simple. And we can just get that off, and then I'll just mince these up a little bit farther. If you're cooking and you're, taking off scraps and stuff like this, you can always save your onion peelings or carrot peelings or whatever it is that you're setting off to the side. You can always save that stuff in like a plastic bag in your freezer until you have a quantity where you can make vegetable stock with. Vegetable stock is an ingredient in this recipe, and it's really easy to make. I'm using, as I said, Trader Joe's vegetable stock today. Actually, I think it's from Fred Meyer, but it's really easy for you to save some of those scraps if you're working on waste reduction strategies at home, or of course, just learning how to make something else, because you can use all these papery parts and all of your onion skins and carrot peels and stuff like that we tend to remove just for texture because it's still full of flavor. And then after you strain it out and you have your vegetable stock, then you can of course use your scraps and throw them right into your compost, and then they can re-enrich the soil. So lots of good waste reduction strategies as we're thinking of, reduce, reuse, recycle, all of that components in general. Garlic's so fun and sticky when you're working with cloves. You could of course use that little can of minced garlic if that's what you have at home. That works too. I'm just going to cut off these little end pieces, and then I'm going to mince this up pretty finely.
Mariah, do you have any secrets for growing garlic or onions?
I mean, honestly, so garlic you plant in the fall, and you can use, you know, commercial garlic that's started sprouting, and you break it into its individual cloves and then plant those. Though mine, you know, if I leave my big Costco bag alone long enough, it will start sprouting. So then you can plant those. And they, I mean, they're not very finicky. I've never had issues with growing my garlic. They definitely came up even after I moved my garden and then ran them over with the lawnmower, and they just kept coming up. So of course the tops of garlic, the garlic scapes, are also really delicious, and they're that green part, which has a more mild flavor than your garlic cloves. But then they're ready for harvest the next year for garlic. So you have to let them have that whole season to grow, and that's after planting them the previous fall. That said, this like wet weather that we're about to get into with the springtime is a really great time to plant onions. So that's the type of weather that your onions and your potatoes are really going to take off in. So just think of all our good root vegetables. Of course, we have a very strong root vegetable culture in Montana, though not in necessarily the traditional ways that we think of root vegetables, like potatoes, which are indigenous to South America, and are, you know, thinking of onions, right? We have onions, but they're not quite the big bulbs that we get commercially now. That said, we have prairie turnips, which are, let's see, prairie turnips are Pedmodium esculenta, and that's a really nice low glycemic potato type of root vegetable, though it's a legume actually. So it looks very similar to lupin, and it has those purple flowers with those lupin, very similar to lupin shaped leaves if you see them. And they grow in dry sandy soils on the prairie, and they were traditionally harvested for the roots, which you pull out a root and then you have to peel it. And I think I had an image of prairie turnips in my ethnobotany class that we did, which is recorded. So you guys can also look up prairie turnips and familiarize yourself with that. If you're in the eastern part of the state, that's something you will more likely have access to. Folks on the western side of the mountains, and even me on the Blackfeet Reservation, don't have easy access to prairie turnips, except you can look on like the dry sandstone caps. If I were to go over by Cut Bank or something, I might have some more luck. So by the way, I'm also going to peel this sweet potato here. And the number of, again, you can save sweet potato peels to make your vegetable broth with. The number of sweet potatoes that you add to this recipe is entirely dependent on how much you like sweet potato. So I'm actually going to use a couple of smaller sweet potatoes, but I've also seen giant sweet potatoes, and sometimes I'll only put one in this whole recipe. It's also really standardized for 1 cup of pumpkin, though if you're, or 1 can of pumpkin. So if you're using your own processed pumpkin, you know, something that you've roasted and pureed yourself, you can measure out an approximate amount. We're making a nice creamy broth with that, which is not necessarily exact proportions. This isn't baking, it's just cooking. It's just making a nice 1-pot meal. So I'm not stressing out the importance of peeling every square inch of my sweet potato. I'm just getting enough of it so I don't have a ton of skin and everything. And then I'm going to cut these into about square inch chunks. So I'm just going to make nice, big, large bite size is what I'm going for. Chunks of sweet potato. Again, sweet potatoes are a great root vegetable, though they're indigenous to South America. And if you were looking for other root vegetables besides prairie turnips, Canis is a root vegetable. really high in inulin. So if you've ever had sunchokes, which are another indigenous food related to sunflowers, of course, sunchokes are also pretty high in inulin. Not as high as Canis, but they need to be cooked a long time. Or people have a sunchoke cooking method that's actually, it's a fermentation. And that will help break down the inulin and make the sunchokes more digestible. So that is a really good option for sunchokes, because if not, well, another name for sunchokes is Jerusalem artichokes, which doesn't make any sense because they're an indigenous food of the Americas, but their nickname is fartichokes. So if you don't cook the inulin out of your sunchokes, you will have issues. Same thing with Canis. So traditionally Canis, which is of course a beautiful blue flower, it's a root vegetable. It is traditionally harvested actually after the Canis blooms. So it's after the plant has gone to seed and the nutrients have returned back to the bulb. That makes identifying Canis a little bit more challenging if you're doing it in the traditional season they were harvested, because of course, then you don't have the pretty blue flower to use to identify them. There's also a variety called Death Canis, which is easy to tell apart if they're blooming because Death Canis is white, but our edible Canis is blue, and that makes it a little bit more challenging. So for safety, some people harvest them when they are blooming, but then of course the plant isn't allowed to go to seed, and you have to be really careful about not over harvesting. And also you're not getting as many nutrients out of the Canis bulb if you're waiting until that, or if you're not waiting until that time. And then they were pit roasted, essentially underground. You cook the Canis for multiple days. Oh, this sweet potatoes. No good. It's a little old. So, is there another sweet potato? There's a third sweet potato, right?
Yeah.
Can I kidnap it? I was like, this sweet potato is a little old inside. Just raiding the pantry. I'm also going to peel this little ginger here. So there are wild ginger in the Northeast. Oh, thank you. There is wild ginger in the Northeast. Again, this is our commercial variety, but ginger adds a lot of really good flavor to this recipe. Easiest way to peel ginger is not to use this vegetable peeler, but actually we're just going to take a spoon and scrape off that papery skin. So you can kind of see what's going on here. And that just scrapes it right off without cutting into the root. And I'm gonna use about a 1-inch piece, but I like ginger, so I'm not going to, you can adjust this if you hate ginger. But ginger is a good digestive aid, a great immune booster, and of course it has a nice flavor that adds to this as well. So just, this is a good recipe. I'm using my standard green lentils for this recipe today. I originally made this recipe for my website because so many of the foods are on the WIC list. And so it's a great way to make lentils that is a little bit different than folks are imagining. It's also, we use it in the food pantry because of course we get massive donations of canned pumpkin after Thanksgiving. And after Thanksgiving, people forget what to do with pumpkin. So I like this because it's like a cozy winter soup, but it's not, and it's not a pumpkin pie. People need something else to do with pumpkin besides just pumpkin bread and pumpkin pie and pumpkin spice things. So I'm just going to dice up my ginger into little pieces, kind of like I did with my garlic. And then I actually get to work on starting to cook it. So the first thing we're going to do is actually, I have about 2 tablespoons of oil in the pan that I already poured in. And if you want to use an indigenous oil, you could use sunflower oil or avocado oil, but also a light olive oil works fine too. That's obviously a good healthy oil. It's obviously from the Mediterranean, but it's a good healthy oil. Traditionally, of course, people were cooking with a lot of tallow, buffalo fat, things like that. And that was adding some good fat and nutrients into their diets. And there we go. So we're gonna saute our onions first until they get translucent. We're gonna add in our garlic and briefly saute those. And then once we've done that, we're going to add in our spices. And I just have a couple teaspoons of cumin and a couple teaspoons of coriander, which is going to flavor this. And then of course, we don't want that to burn. So we're gonna have to keep moving that. And then after that cooks for about 30 seconds, it's a technique that just helps get some of the spices flavor out of the spices a little bit more. After that cooks, then we're going to add our pumpkin, a can of coconut milk, and our vegetable broth. And then we can add our sweet potatoes and our rinsed lentils and start cooking everything. So I am going to start doing that, which means I need to transition over here. So let me adjust this.
If anyone has any questions, throw them in the chat. And then as we come to an end while the cookies are baking, we can I can take you off mute and you can ask live questions. But if you have questions in the meantime, I also in the chat put Mariah's the pumpkin lentil soup recipe from her website. And I've also added that to our resource list as well as a video of Roger White up from Fort Peck harvesting prairie turnips.
See, you're so on it, Jennifer. But I didn't tell you, Jennifer, the cookies don't have to bake. That's why you can do them in the classroom.
Groovy.
I doubt a lot of these teachers have
Every
ovens in their classroom.
right now, every teacher's like, oh my gosh, now I have to bake them. I'm on this.
Yeah, I was like, no baking, no baking. And also I said they were 3-ingredient cookies. One of the ingredients is salt. So that's actually not necessary if you don't want it. They could be 2-ingredient cookies. My ingredients being sunflower seeds and maple syrup. So we will get to those, but it's super easy. The most complicated part is just deciding how you want to grind up your sunflower seeds, because you need to make a sunflower seed flour. So the easiest way is a coffee grinder and just go voo. But you can of course occupy kids for a while with a mortar and pestle or a rolling pin. I have taken, and what I'll probably do is just wrap my cylindrical water bottle in like plastic wrap or something and just go like and grind them up, because that's what I'm doing, winging it here. And then you just mix enough maple syrup so that everything is able to stick together without being sticky. You just want it to be able to press into basically little hamburger patties in your hand. And from there, you can just eat them raw if you wanted to, or I'm gonna pan brown them real quick in some oil. So.
Do you know, Tim Ryan is our next presenter next Saturday. And so we'll be talking about plants as technology and some other wonderful stories that he's planning on sharing. But do you know, did the Blackfeet have any like mortars and pestles that you found, you know, in cultural sites?
I have a very long book about archaeology of Glacier, and I think some of that information's in there.
It seems like it was.
Well, because yes, I mean, we were taking things like prairie turnips, which is also called, it's also our breadroot. And that was also traditionally ground down so that it could be used as like a thickener in soup and stews. So stuff like that had to be ground down anyway.
Put it out on the prairie and wait for the bison to herd over the vegetables and smash them for you.
Yeah, that's a little bit unideal.
They'd be obliterated. There's a question in chat. There a lot of good information shared, or lesson plans or compiled information to share with the students. So for right now, I don't have any lesson plans. If any teachers are writing any, I would just absolutely love if you wanted to be generous and share them. I would be happy to share those on the website. If you're really interested in writing a series of lessons, contact me and I'll see if I can shake the bushes for a few dollars to share with you if you want to do that, especially if they're connected to the science standards, the Montana Content Science Standards. But as far as the information, that all of it, as much as I can, I'm putting into on the resource page. So if Mariah says anything that I think isn't on there, I'll go find it during the workshop and add that to the resources. So that's a really good question.
Cool. So I'm just letting my big chunks of onion cook into relative translucency. Of course, my light's too bright now. There we go.
I want to acknowledge that backsplash. That's gorgeous.
Right? I'm like, it's not like I'm like, it's still in a digi kitchen. So my onions are cooking down. I'm going to scoop up my garlic and add that to here. I think I normally use about 2 cloves of garlic, but these cloves were so teeny tiny that I used a whole bunch of teeny tiny ones. So traditionally, when we look at seasonings, indigenous seasonings, there's a lot of things that fall within that category. So cedar, for one, I actually, because I'm in Washington right now, I actually picked a whole bunch of cedar yesterday. I think it's sitting in the car. But those big cedar branches, if you're somewhere on the western side of the state, in the northwestern side of the state where you have cedar, that makes a really great tea. You can just cut off those cedar branches, put them in water and boil them for about 30 minutes. And then that's a really good vitamin C rich tea. Or, you know, you can use that cedar and cut it up and use it as a seasoning, kind of like you would rosemary, right? It kind of, obviously it has a texture that you kind of have to cut it down a little ways. But you can get that same cedar flavor that you get in a cedar infused or a cedar plank, right? Without having to cut down a cedar tree. So you can still get that seasoning out of it.
Do you have a way to honorably harvest the cedar?
Honorably harvest? Yeah, I mean, so yesterday I didn't have tobacco when I was harvesting. We were just walking the dogs. And so I just said a thank you to the trees for giving me a little bit of cedar, and that was that recognition of gratitude. And also, you know, of course, I'm picking from cedar branches from great big trees that are not going to be harmed by me taking a couple of branches. Also, my mother wanted to remind anyone, if you're harvesting in public places like college campuses, harvest above waist high. And that's my contribution from yesterday when hiking around.
So last week, I was up in Polson working, and I was with an Ojibwe woman, and she taught me the Ojibwe way of harvesting, and which I won't be able to share because it was just a very quick lesson, but their gift is either tobacco or water. And really, you know, anything, but it's just that acknowledgement of this amazingly old living being that's going to benefit us. And then we have another question in chat. Aside from intention, is there a difference between ceremonial cedar and seasoning cedar?
No, no, I mean, it's, you know, whether you're using, there's no botanical difference, that's for sure. Though the cedar that we have in Montana is a Western red cedar, which is the same thing I have, you know, out here in Washington right now. It's Western red cedar, which is in the genus Thuja, Thuya, which is the same as Eastern white cedar. So same genus, and I don't remember the species for each one of those, but those are very closely related. So if you're from the East, or you know the cedars in the East, those are pretty closely related. You will also hear the term cedar applied to a lot of juniper plants, which is genus Juniperus. And so you'll hear people say cedar a lot when you guys saw me put spices in this pot. And so I just kept it moving. I turned down my heat so they wouldn't burn, but now we're adding our liquids in here so this can start to cook down. Coconut milk is so thick. Juniper has also been used to make tea and obviously to make spices as well. Juniper berries, for example, are all edible. Juniper leaves, you know, similarly to cedar, can be used to make a tea, though it's going to have a slightly different flavor. And then dried juniper berries have been ground down and used as a seasoning as well. I mean, besides seasoning gin, I guess, juniper has been used for a number of other seasonings. So that's something else to try. I think juniper berries kind of add like a spiciness to something. Juniper wood and juniper ashes have been used as a seasoning, specifically in the Southwest, because they both help create an alkaline solution that's used for treating corn. If you add wood ashes to water, it raises the pH. So if a science teacher gets really excited and wants to do something cool about acids and bases, you could do a hominy making class, because that basic solution is going to chemically remove the hull of dried corn, and it makes it way more digestible. And it makes it so that the bound niacin in the corn is a free niacin, and your body can actually absorb it. So if you're not doing this process, which is actually called nixtamalization, Nixtamalization. So nixtamalization, it comes from an Aztec word, which is why it has that X in there. You won't get the niacin out of the corn. So if you're eating corn tortillas, you'll see on the back, corn treated with lime, because of course culinary lime does the same thing, raises the pH and makes the corn more digestible. And also then you can take that now softened corn that's been nixtamalized and grind it down and get masa and make tamales or traditional native cornbread, different things that you make with masa, arepas, tortillas, different things like that. So lots of options after it's been nixtamalized. I have to talk to the AP Chem teacher at Cut Bank High School, because she was talking about doing an acids and bases lab using, doing hominy making. So they were going to try different types of wood ashes. I don't know if they ever did that. I am curious to know how it went, if they did.
That's such a great example of indigenous knowledges. You know, when you think about how old corn is and, you know, how that technology has been around for millennia.
Yeah, that ability to make, you know, to recognize that cool acids and bases. I mean, that basic trick, the basic trick that makes it more digestible is really incredible. But also, wood ashes have a lot of calcium in them. So a teaspoon of wood ashes gets you more calcium than a glass of dairy milk, but is also way more absorbable to your body. So you've heard that dairy isn't super accessible for folks to actually get the calcium in them. So that was a main way people got calcium. And also using wood ashes as a seasoning on food, which, you know, we know that in order for food to be, you know, make USDA reimbursable meals in our school lunch programs, we have to have a serving of dairy with it. And we also know that a lot of Native people, a lot of people of Asian and Pacific Islander descent, as well as a large portion of Africa, have very high rates of lactose intolerance. And so it's an interesting food policy because, of course, the idea is kids need calcium, build strong bones. But if I were to like start advocating that wood ashes were incorporated as like mandatory for USDA reimbursable meals, people would probably freak out. But it is a more accessible form of calcium, and it's been used as seasoning. And if you guys have smokers at home and you smoke meats, you recognize that wood and wood smoke have different flavors, and that is definitely a traditional seasoning right there. So
I'm a novice gardener, my second season. I'm starting out, and I've been reading that my tomatoes need calcium. Could I use wood ash mixed in with my soil for tomatoes?
yes, wood ashes are actually a really great source of potassium for plants as well.
Oh,
so that's where you hear like potash.
And NPK.
NPK, yeah, wood ashes can add to your K number a lot too.
Wow, all right.
Okay, so I'm just adding my liquids in here to get things going. I just have this on medium heat. Again, I already told you guys my secret ingredients from here. And I made this recipe so it was very easy with store-bought ingredients. But, you know, you can make your own vegetable broth. That's something that you can do. You can process your own pumpkins if you're doing this in the fall or in the winter when you still have a pumpkin laying around. And then you guys know for lentils, you need to make sure to rinse them. So that's what I'm going to do.
So we have an interesting question in chat about the going back to the harvesting of the cedar in public places. When harvesting in public spaces, does one need to worry about pesticides, or does the larger vegetation process them out enough?
So it depends on where you're harvesting. So if I'm harvesting up, like I'll harvest on the not glacier side of the Flathead River. As you're up in like West Glacier, I'll find cedars there on my drive home. I am pretty careful to make sure that I'm at least getting like, 20 yards back from the roadways, because you'll get that accumulation of exhaust over time on the outside of your cedar. And I'm washing it off before I make tea out of it. But if you're thinking of something that you're going to take directly from the plant, which may have pesticide deposits or exhaust fumes or something like that on the outside, and then put it into a pot of water and then drink that water, you want to make sure that whatever you're drinking is clean, right? So if I am harvesting, you know, there are certain things that are often treated with pesticides. So like a lot of flower beds in like public gardens, probably not a great idea. Even like people's yards, you know, if you know that they don't spray and they haven't sprayed for at least 3 years, you're going to be good, right? Whereas if you're like, this person doesn't have any dandelions in their main yard, like they've probably been doing something bad. And you can assume that the bordering yards are probably going to have some type of blow off from that as well. But if you have a friend and you know that your friend is like, nah, I don't have the energy to use pesticides and things like that, and I'm just out here with my fenced backyard, take all the dandelions you want. You guys are smart, and I trust you to use your critical thinking brains with this one. But yeah, I mean, there are definitely things that you would be concerned about pesticide spraying and stuff like that. That said, like, nobody's spraying their decorative juniper trees in hotel parking lots with pesticides, right? Like, people don't care that much about their juniper trees. So, you know, Sean Sherman, who is the sous chef, and I were doing a demonstration at a hotel in Billings, and he's outside like cutting junipers, right? Because they're there as something that adds green to like the backside of the parking lot and is kind of like a border fence. But it's a juniper. No one's like, oh no, the juniper will be in danger of aphids or something. Whereas people are a little bit more aggressive about their their roses, their fancy roses or things like that. So that said, also wild rose hips taste way better than commercial rose hips, by the way.
So much sweeter.
Yeah, I was like, wild roses are infinitesimally better. I mean, commercial roses are still edible, but commercial rose hips are edible. It's not worth it.
So back to dandelions, you know, I am going organic in my garden. Plus, I am one of the only gardens for blocks around. So I am an island for several species to get rejuvenated and get food and water and shelter. So I let all my dandelions live last year, but I just learned that if you mow them after the first blooms, that they will come back and benefit more pollinators. So I'm pretty excited to try that out this summer. So, and I'm sorry, I'm garden obsessed right now because the sun is shining, and every sunny day that's not freezing, I am out prepping my garden. So I'm anxious to get out there today, but these are my first perennials too. So I just peeked out yesterday and I saw a little bit of green of my rhubarb and some of my comfrey and bee balm. They're all poking little tiny. So I'm just absolutely excited to see what happens with my perennials. I can only imagine how exciting it would be to have a school garden that you do with your kids and to watch those things. And I was gifted 2 currants that had been grown in the tribal greenhouse. So I'm really, really excited to see how those currants do. I can just feel that they're gonna like where I put them. And you know, that's something that came up a lot in this last trip was just the and if you haven't read Braiding Sweetgrass or Gathering Moss by Robin Wall Kimmerer, one of Mariah's teachers, I can't recommend it enough. And I know we talk about it with every time we do ethnobotany, but she really has a way with words as well as just teaching about the spirits of plants. And I'm just becoming so aware of how much energy plants have to offer and how I approach them, you know, and that honorable harvest, I think is so important. I feel like it's making me a better human.
Did you plant any oregano in your garden last year?
I did.
Yeah, I'm super excited. My oregano is coming back because I planted it in a raised bed, and it was like a hexagonal raised bed. So that it has like all these dividers. It has 7 spots, right? So it was I'm like, this is where I'm planting my herb garden. And there's an old ranger station in St. Mary, just inside the park border. And it was built in 1913. And I was doing a presentation there. And so we just got outside and we were doing a plant walk. And I'm going outside and there's like a little trail that starts there. And so I'm going to the plant walk and we're talking about the choke cherries and the service berries and all the fireweed and all of this. And then there's like a huge patch of oregano. And I'm like, why is there a giant patch of oregano right here? Just like a nice little patch. And at first I was like, oh, it's mint. And then I was like, this isn't mint, this is oregano. And eventually the park ranger that was with me emailed like a couple weeks later and she's like, I've been asking questions and I think someone had a kitchen garden planted outside at one point. And oregano is incredibly hardy. It was -35 this last winter and it was in a raised bed at my house, which meant that like all that cold was permeating to the roots and everything. And like I can just see it, it's like getting green, being happy. So my chives are still like, it's still winter, we're not waking up yet. But my oregano is like, it's wake up time. So if anyone's like struggling to grow an herb, you can plant oregano outside, it'll be fine.
My is going crazy. I planted my thyme, interspersed it with my strawberries that all came in containers. So I transplanted them in late summer to get them, you know, get their roots all acclimated. And it seems like I covered them all winter, lots of mulch and some cloth, and they all seem to be doing well. And the thyme is going crazy. I did lemon thyme too. And when I took off the cover, you could smell that beautiful lemon thyme smell. But the oregano, I planted a spicy kind, and I planted just the regular traditional oregano. And last year it went crazy and it was delicious. So I haven't checked it yet. Now I'm excited to run out and check it.
Yeah, I was like, if my oregano's poking its head up, then yours probably will be too.
There was a lot of chervil growing. One of the things that I was being shown was the spetlum, or the bitterroot that the kids at Polson Middle School, they brought in the culture committee and got approval to transplant some bitterroot from the bison range. And so they have a little patch of it, and it was all blessed and everything by elders. There's a bunch of chervil growing in that bed as well, and I really didn't know much about chervil. Do you know my? It sure tasted good. I pinched a little bit and tastes like licorice.
I am not sure. I mean, we have a wild licorice on the reservation, so I'm familiar with that. But I don't know a lot about that. But that's interesting. Yeah. I'm trying to think of. I got started talking about seasonings, and now I'm thinking about seasonings because you started talking about licorice and thinking of other traditional seasonings now. And also plants that are really easy to take care of that don't require a lot of attention in the summer. So that's what I'm going to segue into. So I've talked about it before in the other webinar that we did, but yarrow, especially for folks, actually for folks anywhere in the state, yarrow will grow. So yarrow is Achillea millefolium, which is native across the entire northern hemisphere. So Achillea is very similar to, obviously, Achilles, because Greek legend says that Achilles would take yarrow with him in the battle. But Blackfeet stories also tell us that our warriors would take yarrow into battle. And yarrow has blood clotting properties. So if you get a cut and you won't stop bleeding, you take some of that yarrow leaf, whether it's fresh or dried, and you chew it up, and those enzymes in your saliva help activate the blood clotting properties, and you put that on your wound, and that will help stop the bleeding. So yarrow is also, I mean, it's used to make a tea, so you can make tea out of dried yarrow, including the flower. So you can use leaves, stems, flower, any aerial parts, so parts above the ground, would make a tea. If you're on blood thinners, I wouldn't drink a lot of yarrow tea, but you'd have to drink a fair amount of yarrow tea to start experiencing blood clots, or to have it counteract blood thinner medication. Yarrow also has been used as a seasoning because yarrow has a flavor profile that's very similar to tarragon. So you can use yarrow like you would tarragon, and it digs like poor soil conditions, dry prairies, rocky nonsense, but also grows on most of the trails. I was like, there's not a lot of places in the state where I can't find yarrow if I'm looking for it. It has a ferny looking leaf, and it's just a really great plant. So it's also, I mean, it's a good immune booster too. I will use yarrow in a lot of things because it also has a really pleasant smell. It's a good pollinator. It's pretty. We have white yarrow, and then we actually have pink yarrow that grows on the Blackfeet Reservation too. It's very light pink, so you'll see it in some of the flowers, and it's definitely not super common, but it is there. What's that?
Yellow across Yellowstone.
Oh, there's yellow. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Like there's definitely, yarrow comes in a lot of colors, so you can buy it at your plant store in very decorative varieties, and some of those are subspecies that are from Europe, but they're all Achillea millefolium, so they're all yarrow. So that is a plant that's very common. Another plant that you may have had a run-in with is your nettle, your stinging nettle. So stinging nettle is actually a great edible plant, though it has little stingers on it. So I would recommend blanching it in hot water before you eat it. But then you can use it basically like you would like a wilted spinach, right? So you can put it in an omelet, or you know, you can just cook it up and have like a nice wild green like that. Stinging nettle also makes a really great tea. So nettle tea is something that gets talked about more as a Nordic type of beverage, but nettle tea is very common across the US, the Americas, Turtle Island, and you will see nettle tea. Folks in Scandinavian countries actually basically are like, nettle tea, that'll solve your problem. You're sick, nettle tea, great, nettle tea. And so it grows really well in Montana. If you're into arts and crafts, nettle makes a really great cordage. So I was at a conference one time in Red Lake, Minnesota. And so I was speaking, but I was also helping out in the kitchen and doing some of the meals for the big catering that we were doing. And the entire time I kept seeing this one person at the conference that was just doing something. He wasn't taking notes. He was just in all the presentations, like watching, and he was doing something with his hands. And eventually I was like, what are you doing? The entire time he was doing this, it's like a French twist type of way of making this like 2-strand cordage. So you're twisting and then you're wrapping, and you're twisting and you're wrapping. And he was just making all of this cordage from nettle fibers, just sitting there. And that was his like busy work thing that he was using. It's like, you know, like a fidget spinner, but he was just making nettle twine. And he was like, yeah, I'm going to do this. And I'm just making a cord or a ball. So he had this ball of nettle fiber rope going. And his plan was when he got home, he was going to make a gill net. And I was like, this guy should be on a loan. No, Um,
Yes, that is Frank Finley. And he has a huge net.
Kevin.
And then next week with Tim Ryan, he'll be demonstrating making cordage with dog bane. So,
okay, yeah, I was like, there's a lot of cool, like good cordage plants. So definitely a cool skill to use. Add it to your zombie apocalypse survival skill.
I was looking, I have some things that Tim made here, but I don't see my cordage, but there's a piece of cord that he made me like, I don't know, 7 years ago. and it's still just great. Still just works. We've got some yarrow growing in Billings. Yay, awesome. Yeah.
Cool. I was like, yarrow's great because you can make a good tea out of it. I love it because it's, you can have those dried yarrow leaves and just put that in your whatever your little hiking day pack is or whatever, put that in your first aid kit. Because you never know when you're going to have a situation that you need something to stop. I mean, pressure's good, pressure's great. Yarrow has blood clotters in it. So that really helps a lot. What were we calling it? The OG Band-Aid, I think. So yarrow. Plantain is another plant. It's not indigenous, but it's not really considered an invasive species either. It's like dandelion, where you have a lot of it, but it's not like out competing native species, right? It's not a knapweed. It is something that's super helpful. It's edible, it's medicinal, and so we just let it do its thing. I bet that you played with plantain when you were a kid in the yard and you're like, here's this leaf that is, there's actually, I think there's narrow leaf plantain out here. There's also broadleaf plantain. I was like, I could go outside and get you a leaf right now and show you guys, which I might in a second. But plantain is those leaves that had the strings in it that were like very like, and then you just like pull them apart and try to get all the strings out of the leaves or something. That's plantain. I'm sure Jennifer is going to drop some picture or link or something in the chat. I'm like, she's probably going to make this a lot more make sense. So plantain it's edible. You can munch on the leaves, though just be careful. Obviously, they grow in a lot of yards, which makes them very easy, but they also grow in driveways. So, don't go eating plantain leaves out of the middle of a driveway. Just as a rule. So they're also really, really good if you get stung by a bee. Or if you get a cut, they're good Band-Aid plants there too. But bee stings, chew up some plantain, put that on a bee sting. There you go, plantain weed. Obviously different than the plantain that's like a giant, slightly less sweet banana. These are not platanos, these are the plantains from your yard and your driveway. So that's a really good thing to know as well. Bee stings, that's a good, helpful thing to put on that type of irritation. So by the way, I just have my soup chilling and simmering back here. I'm basically cooking this until my sweet potatoes get nice and soft and are kind of melting into the soup. So I'm stirring it every once in a while, but really I just have this covered up and I'm just letting this do its thing. So I have my lentils in here. I have everything in here at this point. So that will be free to simmer away as we're talking plants. I also have no idea what time it is anymore. Okay, it's 11. Okay. So also thinking of other plants. So nettle, as I'm on the topic, I was like, let me return to nettle because I haven't fair to say beans were a good trading item since they don't grow well in Montana. Yeah, beans are a good item. And you can grow beans in Montana, though if you're going to grow beans, I would buy varieties from either Montana companies like Good Seed Company or something in Whitefish, Survival Seed, or Montana Survival Seed, folks like that. Or I would find varieties that are Hidatsa in origin, because Hidatsa obviously Buffalo Bird Woman's Garden is a great write-up on indigenous agriculture in the North Dakota area. And they obviously did the Three Sisters, corn, beans, and squash. And so there are varieties of hidatsa corn, right, that will grow well in Montana. Corn it likes a nice long season, but there's some cool varieties of hidatsa corn that are like an 80-day corn, which is a good short season corn. And you'll get little cobs. You're not going to get great big sweet corn cobs, though I realize that I was spoiled in Kalispell growing up because I grew whatever the heck I wanted. And now that I'm at like 5,300 feet in elevation, I'm like, oh, I can't just grow, yeah, triple divide seeds are great, cool, yeah. I was like, there's a lot of nice local seed companies that you can get beautiful heirloom varieties of seeds from. So yeah, I definitely have to think a lot more about season extenders. And I transplanted my corn. I started it inside and then put it outside, which is not what you're supposed to do, but it works. It works. There's also, I think, Buffalo Bird Woman's Garden, she like wrote in there, she's like, yeah, you can plant before you think your first frost is going to happen. And if it frosts after that and kills all your corn, then like replant your corn, you know. And soaking your corn seed is a good way to get higher germination rates, things like that. You know, also there's my partner's from New York, and he does a thing, they soak their corn in like a May apple tea, which is a plant from the East. So May apples basically are toxic. So they soak their corn seed in this May apple tea, and then they plant their corn, which is supposed to keep the birds and rodents from coming and eating the corn while they're waiting to germinate. Or you'll just get, oh, that's weird, there's a dead mouse here that was stealing all the corn, because that it just dropped dead from the May apple tea coating. And of course that doesn't affect the actual corn that you're growing. It just prevents the seeds from getting eaten or kills things that are eating your seeds. I don't know. It's another thing I've heard about corn. So the other thing with nettles, since I'm talking about nettles and I'm not reading all the comments right now, Jennifer. Nettles are also a good pain reliever. You're gonna be like, Mariah, they're stinging. They're not helpful for relieving pain. But yes, Jennifer's making a lot of hand signals. So nettles basically can use their stinging power to essentially just make your make your nervous system go like, too much, stop, and then it just shuts off those nerve receptors for a little while. So I have a friend with fibromyalgia, and she was getting a really bad flare up when we were at this conference in Tama, Iowa. And so I think she came back, and Linda Black Elk, who is a wonderful ethnobotanist, had given her nettle. So she just came in carrying a nettle, right? A nettle plant. And she's like, can you try this on me? She's like, I need you to just like brush this nettle across my back, right? Just like get my whole back. And so it was like hosted at this casino, this like bougie casino. So we were in the back, which was a conference center, and then the front was just full of like people gambling. But they had two entrances to the bathrooms, so everyone was like in the bathrooms. So my friend and I went in like this handicap stall, and she pulls up her shirt so I can just like lightly whip her with this little nettle branch, which of course immediately your body's like, there is searing nettle pain, and then it calms down. And then she curled up under like a table. We were tabling with something. She curled up under a table because there was a tablecloth, and she just fell asleep and took a nap because she was finally able to like rest because her body wasn't screaming in pain. which is kind of a cool thing. My partner has a couple of herniated discs, and we were hiking up towards Chief Mountain, and I did the same thing. I was like, can I try this nettle trick? Because his back was hurting. And so he was definitely like, this is very painful. This is not great. And then eventually he's like, I'm kind of mad, but I have to admit that that worked. So if you get desperate and you need a pain reliever, that's an option. There are also other indigenous pain relievers, which are probably more your style. So red willow bark, which it's the inner bark of our red willow. But that red willow bark was used for a couple of different things. One, it traditionally was added to our tobacco when we were, participating in honorable harvest, and we're adding back to things. But also willow bark can be used in smoking blends as well. So Blackfeet would add kinnikinnick, which is a lovely ground cover up in high mountain areas, as well as red willow bark to our tobacco. And red willow bark is interesting because it contains a lot of salicylic acid, which is the same active ingredient in aspirin. So that red willow bark, you can make a tea out of it. There is a woman, Pauline Matt, who's wonderful. She's in Browning, and she makes a pain salve. She said, if I ran my entire business with just my pain salve, it would be plenty profitable. And so she makes this pain salve from red willow bark and a couple other indigenous plants. And that is what a lot of people I know swear by. I had a boss, and her mom lived in Utah, and had a lot of different pains, and she would just get her mom, her daughter, my boss, to send her like these big bulk orders of this pain salve from the Blackfeet Reservation, because it was the only thing that would help her with like arthritis and joint pain and all of this stuff. So red willow bark is really great for pain relief, and it doesn't have any of the stinging nettle side effects. So that is another thing for pain. I'm like, this is an ethnobotany webinar, so I can just talk plants all day. And I'm letting my soup cook. So other plants that I'm thinking of, I always love talking about arrowleaf balsam root, because a lot of folks have access to that. I can talk about forest plants all the time, but I recognize that a lot of the teachers on the call are probably in prairie areas or places where they don't have access to all the stinging nettles and sarvice berries and huckleberries and thimbleberries and things I'm talking about. So arrowleaf balsam root, of course, if you're in Missoula, you probably have seen the whole hillside covered in those nice yellow flowers. So arrowleaf balsam root's really cool. The root itself is edible, but you have to harvest it pretty early in the springtime, and it's kind of a woody texture. So you have to peel the bark off the outside of it, and then you can cook it, and it will cook like a turnip or kind of a woody potato. It's kind of what the texture is. I don't care particularly for the roots, but you could also grind it up. Like you could dry it and grind it up and use it to thicken soups and stews and things like that, and that works. The things that I think are super cool about arrowleaf balsam root, besides the lovely yellow flowers, are they have these big arrowhead shaped leaves, right? They're great big leaves. So if you have ever made tamales or cooked on banana leaves, you will understand how these leaves were traditionally used. So you can wrap up your food, whatever you're cooking, in a big old arrowleaf, and then put it in hot coals, and that will help protect the food as it's cooking right on that heat. So it buffers the food from getting ashes and things like that on it, but it is still a food safe wrapping for it to be cooked in. So you can make tamales or something like that, or if you're doing a camas bake like I was talking about earlier, you could wrap your camas bulbs in those arrow leaves. You can cook fish if you wanted to wrap like a fish fillet. Obviously you can put a fish with its skin right in coals, but you know, you can wrap meat. You could do like a roast, but wrap it all in leaves and then cook that in hot coals without it getting ashes on the outside. So lots of different options for that. The other thing is the shoots. So in the springtime, when the new shoots are coming out of your arrowleaf balsam root plants, you can take those shoots and you can dry them out, and you can use them to add to soups and stews and season food as well. So that's a great seasoning. I have a recipe that I got from Canis elder from the blood reserve just north of the border, and he sent me a buffalo tongue recipe. So it was a big 1-pot meal with a buffalo tongue, but the seasonings that he had in it were these arrowleaf balsam root shoots as well as wild onions. So those were the main seasonings, and just to kind of make a broth with those things. And then he actually had yampa or double root, which is, I think they have more of those north of the border, but there are definitely some in Montana as well. I know there are a few in like Idaho, and you'll see, I was like, I feel like they like dry prairies, and Blackfeet reservation prairies are not quite dry enough for them. But up north in Kainai, they have those really sandy soils that helps prairie turnips grow, and yampa and things like that. So cool root vegetables. As I was talking, I was like, root vegetables have a big history in Montana. Obviously Bitterroot, which isn't something that Blackfeet had a lot of. We would occasionally trade with the Salish across the mountains for Bitterroot. And of course, Bitterroot's our state flower. So our Bitterroots are not bitter at all, I don't think, when they're added in soups and things. So Bitterroot is delicious and nutritious, and super hard to get because they grow at high elevations. But Bitterroot's a good root vegetable. Another one is Lomatium. So our biscuit roots. So everything within the Lomatium genus is a biscuit root. And so we have a few varieties. One of the most important for Blackfeet people is our Lomatium dissectum, which is our fernleaf biscuit root. And they will grow over the prairies. They'll be pretty low to the ground for most of the year, but they do have nice yellow flowers that kind of, again, it looks like a fern leaf. So the flowers look similar to like a carrot flower almost, though there's a lot of things that look freakishly similar to carrot flowers. So learn how to identify the leaves instead. I was like, don't touch the hemlock. Don't touch water hemlock. That's different. But the fernleaf biscuit root has a big root, obviously, that is really good for treating respiratory illnesses. So if you look up Lomatium dissectum, if you have access to peer-reviewed papers or Google Scholar or whatever, and you want to look up peer-reviewed studies on Lomatium, it is really interesting, the research that's being done on treatment for respiratory illnesses. So of course, indigenous knowledge has long used it to treat respiratory illnesses and coughs and things like that. Folks were treating COVID with Lomatium. So people use Lomatium tinctures or tea or things like that. Lomatium, how do you spell Lomatium? L-O-M-A, I don't know. No, it's Lomatium. Lomatium dissectum. Jennifer's gonna, thank you. L-O-A, so L-O-M-A-T-I-U-M. Oh no, you just typed it with an A now, Jennifer. There you go. Lomatium dissectum. So that's a fernleaf biscuit root. Yeah, close. It ends in an M. Lomatium.
We have arrowroot brand new.
You.
Container.
Oh, yes. Okay, got you. So we also have a 9-leaf biscuit root, which is similar. The biscuit roots are all edible. They're not the most delicious thing, but I was like, they're all tubers that in a lot of cases, you know, you could grind down and you can use to make a flour to thicken things with, or they were used more as medicine. So good things.
You guys
Yeah,
have questions?
on Lomatium after one of our, I'm not sure if it was with you or one of the ethnobotany webinars brought up Lomatium. And I had actually used it when I had COVID. And I thought I had fifth disease because I was getting a rash. And it was because it was too much Lomatium. The portion that I was taking was too much for me. So you do have to be very careful, as with any herb. You know, to make sure that it's okay for you, it's okay with any, you know, if you're taking any Western medicines and things like that. So though
Were you using it as a tea?
a tincture,
A tincture, okay.
it was a blend. Yeah. You specifically get it for, in fact, I just finished another bottle because I have another virus because the daycare that my chosen nephew is in at 4 years old is a petri dish. And we have no immunity, right? Poor teachers. Oh my gosh, I keep hearing about teachers getting so sick this year because our immunity, you know, hasn't been built back up. And I did not have my tea with me that you made, Mariah, to start taking it the minute that I started feeling symptomatic. So I'll have to use that the next time. So Mariah makes like teas. She has a whole website and it's really, her stuff is just lovely. So I highly recommend checking out Mariah's soaps and teas.
Yeah, it was like there's echinacea, which is of course a lot of folks recognize as a big immune booster, and then we have rose hips in that blend too that you got, Jennifer. Which rose hips, of course, they're edible. Most Blackfeet people kind of consider them emergency food. So we have so many berries in Blackfeet country that rose hips were not the most prized. There are better tasting berries. Of course, we have tons of service berries, or as you'll hear in Canada, Saskatoon berries, as you'll hear east of Blackfeet, June berries, or Savis berries if you're on Blackfeet. Some people say Sarvis berry. They're all the same thing. And so we have tons of those. So of course, Blackfeet would traditionally harvest like gallons and gallons of these and then dry them out. And so our word is okanoke, which is really similar to our word okatoke, which means rock. They get rock hard, of course. And these berries, of course, could then be rehydrated anytime throughout the winter. So that made them really, really easy to add to soups or to make pemmican with and to incorporate into food. Serviceberry leaves also make a tea. So that's another plant. In addition to raspberry leaves and huckleberry leaves, you can make teas from any of those berry plants. But serviceberries have been studied. I saw a peer-reviewed paper the other day on using service berries, the berries themselves, as a treatment for Parkinson's disease, the symptoms of Parkinson's disease. So that was an interesting paper, but I've also seen some things about service berries and balancing blood sugar levels in patients with type 2 diabetes. So of course, pharmaceutical companies see this and they're like, how do we extract the compounds from this and put it in this a drug that people can take? But you can also just eat service berries. So I am also thinking, because it's a fruit wood, it's in the prunus, no. Yeah, I think that is in the prunus genus. No, I'm sorry, I lied to you. Choke cherries are in the prunus genus, and service berries are Amelanchier, which there are a couple of different varieties of them, all within that Amelanchier family. But service berries, what am I thinking of now? It's a fruit wood. So what I want to do is take some of the serviceberry wood that I cut down last year because I was making some space for my garden, and I want to take that old serviceberry wood that's been aging and then cut it into wood chips and see if we can smoke trout with it and how that will taste. Serviceberry smoked trout. That sounds good. Same thing with choke cherry. If you're looking for indigenous wood smoke because we're weird and trying too hard to think of cool things, then that seems like a good option. Similarly, choke cherries are a food that we use after the first frost. We would pick choke cherries because that makes them a little bit sweeter. If you've tried choke cherries, they're not particularly sweet by themselves. The first frost does help sweeten them up a little bit, kind of like with kale. If you harvest kale after the first frost, it makes it a little bit better tasting. But Blackfeet and Lakota people and almost all, I think all indigenous people that I know of, would take your choke cherries and you take a big rock. This is Jennifer in the mortar and pestle time, and smash the crap out of them, including the pits. And we would dry them into little berry pancakes, right? Little like fruit leathers, with the pits as part of that pulp that made those little dehydrated fruit patties. So those would become basically these patties that could be either munched on whole, like a little fruit leather, or you could add into soups and stews or remixed into pemmican or something like that. So choke cherries are known for that, but also choke cherries, if you look up choke cherries in your plant ID book or online or wherever, there you go. Does it tell you that the pits are poisonous? Yes, yes. It'll say the pits are poisonous because they contain cyanide. So don't eat choke cherry pits raw. However, the drying process neutralizes that cyanide. So it's not a risk. No one was eating like patties of choke cherries that were dehydrated and then dropping dead. Same thing with elderberries. So we have lots of native elderberries in Montana. Elderberries are a great antiviral against the flu, but they do have cyanide in their seeds, and they don't have seeds that you can really avoid when you're eating. So don't eat elderberries raw. Wait until you can take your elderberries home and put them in boiling water and cook them, because that'll also neutralize the cyanide. And then once you let your elderberries boil, or if they're dried and you rehydrate them, let them boil or simmer for about 30 minutes. And then you can put them in some cheesecloth or your blender and then some cheesecloth and juice them. And then you can have elderberry juice, which is super great for fighting the flu. Again, Sambucus is the genus, and we have blue elderberries and black elderberries and dwarf elderberries in Montana. So those are different than the elderberries that you will get, or the elderberry syrup that you'll get in your health food store. But it's interesting, as a friend of mine that lives up on Duck Lake, and she used to run an organic farm in Minnesota. And she said, like, these are so much like more potent in flavor than the commercial varieties of elderberries. And so she's been like, how can we get folks to test the antiviral qualities of this versus the commercial variety? She's like, she's like, she has this big hypothesis about the potency of our native varieties. And I don't know whose lab is going to do that, but I'm curious to see the results when they do. So that's a cool antiviral fact. And again, there are peer-reviewed studies on that one as well. Like, I can cite a lot of indigenous knowledge, but I know it also helps to see papers and stuff, just coming from an academic background. Obviously, I have a graduate degree and I had to cite things from peer-reviewed sources, which is interesting when you get into indigenous knowledge and you're like, oh yes, we've known this for thousands of years, but 2 years ago we have a paper that also says it, so now it's fine. So I am going to, yeah.
Mariah, because that's the work that we were doing this last week, was we are working on a science, Indian Education for All Science implementation guide. And part of the discussion is recognizing indigenous knowledge and how to, when you learn something, you know, how to be able to integrate that into your regular science classroom. And part of that journey in understanding indigenous knowledges and traditional ecological knowledge, or TEK, is recognizing that this knowledge is equal and valid, and that often in Western science there is a bias. And so being careful when just recognizing, and I am, even though this is my whole like passion area in my career and in my personal life is Indigenous knowledge systems, coming out with a master's degree in science and studying bird ecology at Red Rock Lakes National Wildlife Refuge, and publishing a highly boring study that I did with the lead biologist there. That I had a bias towards Western science, that, oh, this is the only, this is what's proven. And, sometimes delving into our own personal biases has actually worked to expand what my understanding of traditional knowledge and respect. Actually, it's also expanded my deep respect for Indigenous knowledges. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because that is something we're trying to articulate in this guide, that in a palatable and easy way, not to say that, nothing wrong with teaching Western science, but there's it's just a different epistemology. It's a different worldview. It's a different way of making sense of the world around you. And when you've been living on a landscape, that's the most important thing about traditional knowledges and traditional ecological knowledges. It's all land-based and landscape-based. And so the land and the plants and the rocks and the trees and everything on that landscape helps inform this incredible tome of knowledge, and which is, as I'm learning, an immense amount of knowledge. Anytime I get to walk on the landscape like I did this last week, with Salish people, it just was like, oh my gosh, just there's so much knowledge out there. But one of the things that came up as I was taking one of these strolls was Devil's Club. Have you worked much with Devil's Club?
I haven't. And I remember someone asking me about this recently, and I was looking for it because I was trying to find a scientific name. I was trying to figure out what people were talking about, because I think this was being brought up in a discussion about spiky plants scratching the heck out of their legs when they were walking. And they kept pointing at these things, and I think they were calling them Devil's Club. This is like a conversation that happened like last spring, so I'm trying to remember. They kept
Horridius.
What's that?
Oplopanax horridius. O-L-O Panax horridius.
Okay, text it to me or something, Jennifer, and I'm gonna look into this, because I think this person didn't quite know what they were talking about, because they kept pointing at gooseberries, which are like, and the spiky currants that we have, which, like, we have some very aggressive spiky plants, and even the berries have little spikes coming off of them, and as the berries ripen, you can eat the berries, right? And they're very good, actually. They're just spiky currants, and the whole plant's covered in spikes. I pulled a lot of them out of the yard, but I think that's what they were calling Devil's Club. And I'm like, just because it's spiky, it doesn't have a devil name. Let's be calm down here. But I was trying to figure out what plant they were, because there is a plant that has this. What did you hear about it, Jennifer?
That it's just a horrible plant, but I think it was something that's similar to nettles, as far as when a plant presents itself as, or like roses, too, like it that has thorns and prickles and is off-putting. Often that it's actually a very overt expression of that plant being's actual medicinal properties. And so even though it says don't touch me, as far as like don't eat, be careful with me, I'm very potent, but that's as far as we got, because the one person has a distinct kind of very heavy respect for the
Yeah, and I remember it was definitely something that they're like, this thing is the worst. It's scratching me. And of course I'm like, there are no bad plants except knapweed. No. um, but it was definitely something that was brought up in the context of this is hurting me. But they kept just like pointing at spiky things. And I'm like, I can identify all of these spiky things. So it was something that they were referencing that I wasn't looking at the moment. So I couldn't identify it.
I'm trying to remember what I think they were saying that and this is going to sound, kind of out there, but it has properties for like psychic healing. And so in other words, the plant's knowledge can target what needs to be healed in someone. Is like basically my takeaway from that. And the book I keep referencing is The Manual of Montana Vascular Plants by Peter Lesica. So this is sort of like, the go-to ID guide, and has, mostly just the Western scientific information and the binomials of Montana vascular plants, which is a good tome. Somebody asked about books, and we will talk about books a little bit when we get to the teacher portion. So hang in there. There is not one book that covers all of these things, especially since tribes use plants differently, and they may have their own uses for specific plants that grow on their landscape. So we really don't have like one guide for Montana for indigenous knowledge of plants.
Jennifer, do you have the link to the online ethnobotany library?
No.
What? I was like, oh, drop that in the chat. That's a good one, because then you can search by tribe and by plant.
Oh my gosh, ethnobotany library? Okay.
Yeah, I can, here, before I start grinding sunflower seeds using my water bottle, I'm going to look it up real quick. So I'm gonna turn off my video for a second because I'm on my phone. It's a weird link.
Okay, so somebody talked about sweetgrass, and I learned about sweetgrass here in Helena from our food forest, the 6th Ward Garden Edible Forest Park, and sweetgrass is being grown there. And when I first learned about it, I was with some Cree folks, and they showed how to respectfully do a tobacco prayer before harvesting. And the Cree method that I learned was just to braid it right from the ground, tie off the tips, or I guess, yeah, braid it from the, anyway, it was really cool the way that they showed me how to do it. So it was, from the Cree perspective, it was very okay to harvest sweetgrass as long as it was again, kind of that honorable harvest, protocol, and giving it a gift and offering it thanks, and asking that it be used for healing, and that your intentions, are respectful and good with it. But sweetgrass is a plant that, and this is a controversial word when it comes to various tribal members in ethnobotany, but disturbance, it needs to be used. It's a plant that wants to be harvested. It's a plant that wants some sort of disturbance in order to thrive. So if you know of a place where there is sweetgrass, I have been told that it is fine to harvest as long as it's not on tribal land, unless you are a tribal member. So that's what I know about sweetgrass, and it's amazing to work with. If you've never braided sweetgrass right out of the earth, it's a really special experience. In fact, my virtual background was the sweetgrass from that experience, and that I had, those were braids that I had made. Is there anything you would like to add about sweetgrass, Mariah? Does that answer? I'm going back.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add about sweetgrass. That sounds accurate. Sweetgrass in some places, because of reduced wetlands, just because of such severe drought, has definitely been struggling in certain places. So that said, sweetgrass also does like to be picked, and the picking of sweetgrass or cutting stimulates new growth for it. But it doesn't spread very easily from seed. Growing sweetgrass from seed is almost impossible. So sweetgrass proliferates much more easily by transplant and by rhizomal proliferation. I just dropped this in the chat. I was like, it's a really weird, website, naeb.brit.org, but it is a great online resource. It's basically a digitized resource of Daniel Moorman's Ethnobotany book. So you can look up the tribe and it will come up with a list of plants by scientific name. Common names are generally in there as well. And then resources, and then it will have the citations on where that came from. So, you can look up all plants that have been used as abortifacients by the crow or whatever it is. And you can look up those resources on that. So there is a book that has that information in it as well, which is written by Daniel Moorman, Moreman, I think. It's either Moer or More, which I don't know. So it's a good free resource that folks are able to look up plants with. All plant resources are good. So that's a good resource. But I am going to actually show you guys how to make sunflower seed cookies now. So I have over here, and I'm going to adjust this so I can, we're going to look at the floor for a second. And then I'm going to move this over here where we can expand the legs of this tripod to make it more stable. And we are back to the cutting board. As I said, I need to make these into sunflower seed flour. So my method is going to be using my water bottle because that's my rolling pin for the day. And I just have this so I can cover it and so I don't have all my gross hand oils and stickers all over it. But I have a whole bunch of sunflower seeds. I'm actually we're gonna start with a few of them here. I also have a little bowl that I can put my sunflower seed flour into after I grind them up. And I use probably about 1/3 of a cup of sunflower seeds per cookie. So estimate how many cookies you want to make, and that's going to be your ratio. Again, a coffee grinder works really well for this. A mortar and pestle does too. So you guys can see what I'm going for. So sunflower seeds, obviously sunflowers are a wonderful indigenous food. In the sunflower family, something we already talked about is our Jerusalem artichokes, our sunchokes. Also a perennial that I've heard is very challenging to get rid of in your garden once you start growing it, but they do have lovely root vegetables, and those are good to eat as long as you cook them for a while. I will actually boil them in water and then I'll roast them like I roast carrots. Some people say, yeah, you can just roast them, but I wouldn't do that. I boil them so that the inulin is really all cooked out. So this is funny because normally I do this in about 10 seconds.
Inulin, just like artichokes.
What's that?
Did you say inulin, just like the ingredient in artichokes?
Yes, inulin, yes.
I have learned more than what I needed to know about sunflower seeds and why I don't always get along with them.
Oh no, well, sunflowers and sunchokes are related. They're both those they're both, I don't know if inulin is in sunflower seeds in that quantity. I was just talking about sunchokes.
Oh,
and that, you know, they're pretty closely related. You know, some of them were bred to have great big edible seeds that were going to turn into cookies, and some of them were bred to have edible roots, but it's all indigenous agriculture. They're just, you know, like when people bred brassicas and they turned them into broccoli and kale and mustard and everything else under the sun.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, so many brassicas. So similar things with the distribution of breeding in the sunflower family. You have some that were bred for big edible roots and some that were bred for big edible seeds. So I'm just trying to get these down to, this is so funny. I'm just trying to get these down to a nice flower.
You're very strong.
What's that?
Very strong.
It helps. You can see I keep piling them up because then as I smash them down, they press into each other. So I didn't think about packing this tool when we're breaking everything. I didn't think about packing this tool when I packed my bag. So that's on me, but it also shows you that you guys can literally do this in a classroom. If there's any lesson to this, I had to do a cooking demonstration for a podcast, which is of course an audio thing, in Glacier on the side of Two Medicine Lake, where I had no kitchen, no electricity. And so I did this, and I just had sunflower seeds that I ground up. And
Would it be okay if folks, they're at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see a raise hand icon. And would it be okay if folks were to ask you some questions and unmute themselves?
sure thing. I'm just grinding up sunflower seeds.
So if you raise your hand, I will say your name and you can go ahead and unmute yourself. And I will make sure that that is checked here. So yes, you should be able to unmute yourself, but if I see your hand, I will call your name. So obviously we have the benefit and the gift of someone who has an extraordinary amount of plant knowledge. So what questions do you have for her? There's been some good ones in the chat so far. This is great. I love seeing this adaptive technology. Ryan would approve.
You know, it's funny. I always tell people when I do these demos, I'm like, or you can use this, or you can use this. I could use this can of pinto beans here, right? And I always tell people, but mostly I just end up blending it in a coffee grinder because that's fast. And that will.
The bummer part about Zoom is it is not smell-o-vision. Not that I could smell anything today anyway, but what does the kitchen smell like with that soup on in the back?
Oh my gosh, it smells like, well, I mean, you guys know what cumin smells like, right?
Oh yeah.
So it's like a garlicky cumin, ginger warmth. It's like a good warmth happening smell-wise. So I'm actually, because I'm lazy, I'm actually keeping some big chunks of my sunflower seeds in here, and I'll scoop out my larger chunks, but I'm a person that likes some nuts in my chocolate chip cookies, which is the texture that we can keep by keeping some of my seeds whole, actually, which is something that I will do in my coffee grinder examples too. I won't grind it completely into a flour. And of course, if you grind your coffee grinder stuff too much, you will end up with sunflower butter, which you can use to make cookies and things, but not exactly in this way. So
there is a question in the chat. I am
Yeah.
curious about bloodroot. My mom used it and the cancer she had on her nose never came back. She had it removed several times before trying the bloodroot.
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm not familiar with bloodroot actually.
I've never heard of it.
So that's a great question. But I'm very happy for your mom.
Yes, absolutely.
I don't know. I wish I knew more about it. If you know the scientific name of it, you could look it up in that ethnobotany research and see what kind of indigenous citations exist for that plant. That'd be cool.
So as Mariah is grinding up sunflowers in the chat, I did put the sign in. So if you're seeking renewal units, make sure to get signed in, because I will close that right at the end of the workshop today. There's also the resource folder link, and then there's also our conference link. So our Indian Education for All Best Practices conference will be free and it's virtual. So that link is there as well. And if you are even if you're not a teacher, so you won't be joining us for the teacher discussion, please do fill out our survey. They have just been enormously useful in justifying more and more workshops such as this. So please make sure to fill out that feedback survey. I'll leave that open until Monday morning because quite frankly, I won't be logging back in after we all log off today. So just so you know that those are there, and I'll repost them as well. And bloodroot is going to get looked up and researched. Are there any other questions? I know I had a question, Mariah, that came up when I was up in Polson walking through the garden. And it's regarding the three sisters. You had mentioned that sunflowers can have be toxic to beans. Was that all beans or just bush beans? Because isn't the sunflower considered a fourth sister?
Yes. So sunflowers have compounds that they release from their roots, which actually inhibit the growth of other plants. One of those plants that is specifically susceptible to those, I think they're called allelopathic. Those allelopathic compounds in sunflower roots are beans. That's all beans. So they're considered a fourth sister in a way, but they're considered a fourth sister in a border plant type of way. So they use fields, or they will border the fields with sunflowers, which helps prevent other plants from spreading into the field.
Got it.
Sunflowers act like a big barrier where plants can't get through that soil layer because of those allelopathic compounds. So you don't want to plant your sunflowers right next to your three sisters.
Got it. Okay.
Because they release, and you can look up those, sunflower compounds, or if you see any companion planting book, you'll often hear about plants that you can use as trellises for your beans. And sunflowers are not one of them. Even though they're big and tall and they have a nice stem similar to corn in that way, they don't work in the same way. So I'm going to grab something real quick.
Oh, I love this question in the chat. Do you have any suggestions for a beginner to start a journey on cooking more naturally from the land? Yes, you can't go wrong. If you grow something and it doesn't grow, this is all personal advice. No, but cooking, did you hear the question, Mariah? Do you have any suggestions for a beginner to start a journey on cooking more naturally and from the land? And I use a lot of cookbook for my tradition. I don't have a lot of Middle Eastern people to teach me about, my culture's cooking. And so I have gotten a lot of books on Israeli cooking, and that's where I've learned so much more about different spices and spice blends. And I have to say that more and more people are inviting themselves over for, like dinner, particularly when we have feasts like the one coming up in 2 weeks, Pesach or Passover. And we have a huge feast, of course, nothing leavened at that feast. But really, I've just learned more about my culture through getting those cookbooks. Do you have any advice?
My advice would just be to start learning plants in your area. So I have a Google Pixel, right, my phone. So it uses Google Lens. And so we were walking the dogs last night, and occasionally I'd be like, stop, wait, stop. And I'd go and I'd use my Google Lens tool on my phone to do plant IDs. Because I'm like, I'm sorry, I have to figure out what this is, because we're in a very different place. Right now I'm in a Pacific Northwest rainforest, and there's lots of moss and like things growing from the undergrowth. I'm like, I have no idea what these things are. So I was just doing plant IDs. And so I pull up plant IDs and I go, okay, that's this, but also then I'll go read the page on it. And I'm like, oh, this thing it's an edible plant, but it's, it's the leaves that are edible, they're edible raw, whatever it may be. So, that's something I've done a lot of. But one of the first things to get started is like, learn what to do with dandelions, right? That's easy. You know what a dandelion is. Dandelions are super accessible to everyone and you don't ever have to risk over harvesting dandelions. So you can start with the dandelion flowers, and you can learn about dandelion fritters, where you're basically like battering the dandelion flowers and frying them. That's an option. So you can look up dandelion fritter recipes online. Again, these are very accessible resources to folks. You can learn dandelion greens and how to use them. So you can incorporate them into salads, or you can blanch them, or different things with that. Dandelion greens are a little bit bitter, but if you harvest the newer early leaves, those are going to be your better flavor. The great big leaves at the end of their lifespan are more bitter. More nutrients, but more bitter. And then you can learn about the roots, and you can harvest dandelion roots, which are of course great big tap roots. And if you learn how to roast the roots, which you can do in your oven, you can make something that's basically, it tastes like coffee. It's like a non-bitter coffee. So you can make a roasted dandelion root tea, or look up dandelion lattes. So use like a coconut milk or something and sweeten it with like a little bit of maple syrup or a little bit of honey, and you brew the roasted dandelion roots in your coconut milk. Or I guess you could just use like a regular steamed milk or something. Anyway, you could just start from using and learning how to use the entire dandelion plant, because that's something you can probably find, and then start learning about more of the plants in your area, whether you're using a plant identifier app, or whether you're going on plant walks. If you have resources, like I went up to Lone Pine State Park and they had a plant walk about edible plants. And so that was something super fun. Also, I realize I'm just talking with my hand and I'm a faceless being. So I'm going to do this real quick and then you guys can see my face again.
Do you know the website where we can buy the red willow bark salve?
Go to Sage and Oats.
Oh.
Sage and Oats, actually, she sells all of Pauline's stuff online for her. So Sage and Oats is basically her distributor now.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so Sage and Oats on Etsy, and she has that, I can't remember what it's her pain salve. It's the pain salve.
Okay, I am looking for it, so hopefully I can find the link.
Okay, so I'm going to start adding a little bit of maple syrup to this, and then I'm going to stir it up with my hands, which makes this a particularly fun recipe for kids because they get to put on gloves and get their hands dirty. I'm going to stir this up in here. I want it to be just moist enough so that it will hold together in a shape, but I don't want it to be like sticky sticking to my hands. So because I didn't measure out my ingredients, then I don't have to, I'm not measuring this out either. So I'm starting to mix this up.
Okay, there's lots of varieties here. So this is just the basic, this will get you to where all of the varieties of the bombs are.
I was like, she has a few, she has like warrior woman hands or whatever her stuff is. So,
yeah. Do the sunflower seeds have to be partially intact, or could you use a food processor to grind them up?
Use a food processor to grind them up. Go
Or-
for it.
I have an extra coffee grinder that I got at the thrift store. It was almost brand new. And
Yeah.
I use it for all of my spices, and actually I have one for just for nuts, and then one for spices, and one for coffee, because don't mess with my coffee.
Yep. Oh, I have like 2 extra ones just for grinding up non-coffee things at home. So that's what's funny about this is I'm like, I haven't done it with this large of pieces of sunflower seeds before. So I also added a little bit of salt in here just because the salt brings out the sweetness of everything.
So I'm guessing the smaller the pieces, the easier it is to form a cookie.
Yep. So this is fun. No.
It's always fun working with our hands.
Always fun working with our hands. So this is going to be real interesting for me today, huh? My cookies are just going to fall apart. Now I'm really trying to, let me see something. Give me 1 second here.
I am thinking too that if you did roast them first, then they would be a little bit drier, and therefore, make it easier to stick together too, if you're into roasting them.
So I have tried doing this with salted roasted sunflower seeds,
Mhm.
and it just doesn't taste as good.
Oh, okay.
I'm not gonna lie, it's just not as delicious.
Well, I have a whole brand new bag of sunflower seeds, so raw sprouted. I'm excited to try this. And I love that it's no cooking, so hopefully some of you teachers will be able to make this too. Kids.
All right, this is gonna be funny. Remember how I told you guys I wasn't in my home kitchen? No.
Jack there?
Yeah, my dad.
We want to say hi to Jack.
Oh, he's not here.
Oh, okay.
He's outside or somewhere relatively nearby.
Well, please tell him I said hello.
Be yourself.
Mariah's dad is Jack Gladstone, so also known as Montana's troubadour. Called the Capitol in the past several years on hold. His music was used there, and he's done lots of presentations at best practices. And
The other ones, and or even out, it can look like you're probably deadly on the line. Well, looks pretty cool.
okay, there
Okay, guys, here's what's happening. Ta-da. So we're gonna save it this way. My very scary dogs are having a blast. So now you guys see it's sticking together in a nice little ball. So I needed a little bit more flour consistency. So problem solved. So I'm just making my own little mess here. And well, you know what? I'm gonna add a little bit more flour to this actually, because I can now that I have the tools. So I basically want these to stick together and to be slightly smaller than my palm. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a little bit more sunflower seed flour. think when you roast them, Jennifer, it kind of cooks out some of the oils, and I think the oils in the sunflower seeds help them stick together. That's gonna be my logic, because you want cookies that have some oil in them.
Yeah.
You don't want to make cookies without oil, but obviously sunflower seeds, when they're raw, have oil in them. So okay, so I added so much maple syrup at the beginning, and you really don't need that much. So now it makes a lot more sense now that I have the right proportion of everything. So this is a little cookie, but you guys can see that I have my little cookie here. Here, let's go right there.
And do you let those dry at all, or are they ready to
Nope,
eat?
this is ready right now. So you can obviously eat this because it's just maple syrup and sunflower seeds and salt. So there's nothing poisonous about this. But I'm gonna brown it up. So I'm actually going to set these aside. And then I'm gonna put a little bit of oil in my pan, and I'm just gonna brown them. So I'll flip them and do a little quick browning process. So it's like I'm quickly pan frying them, but without a lot of oil. So that will be my only roasting process. And again, that's not even necessary. You could use a hot plate in the classroom to do that. You could, I suppose you could bake them, though I haven't established a baking strategy for them yet.
They'd be a great trail food.
It's a great trail food, yeah. And you can incorporate dried berries or something like that. Okay.
Well, I am already seeing that we should probably do this again, maybe either next fall or next spring. I have loved this so much, just having it be a little bit less formal than the webinars. And I probably will still do an Ethnobotany series 2 webinars, but definitely more cooking workshops. Raise your hands. Those of you who I can see your faces, raise your hand if you want to do this again. Yay! Awesome. Oh, look at that. It's like we're populated. Everyone wants more, Mariah. Awesome. Very cool. Very cool.
Okay, I can mix up the rest of my cookies later, but I'm gonna move over here and I'm gonna heat up my pan. Make sure I have a spatula, and then I have 3 cookies ready to go. So you guys can see that process, and then we're good to go.
Well, this is someone who knows how to do this cooking show thing. I love it.
So we have our little cookies. If your cookies don't stick together, it's not the end of the world. You can still pan toast them, but they'll probably make better like oatmeal topping or ice cream topping or something than cookies. They'll be deconstructed cookies, right? Serve them with some berries. That's actually what I do if I was doing like a fancy like catering thing, and have a cup of cookies, and then you can mash up a whole bunch of fresh berries and make some type of berry sauce for them. You could do a berry reduction or make a cool curd or something. Those are all valid options for topping these. So you can make these, you can take these straight from trail food snack to dressing them up a little bit more if you wanted to. All good. Do you guys have other questions while we're doing this? And
Are there any, there's just some love in the chat. My grandma did this type of cooking. She was Sioux. We are from Standing Rock Reservation. Nice job. Big red heart. I enjoyed this. Thank you so much. I love the idea of keeping these as energy bites for after workouts or outdoor activities. This has had so much new information. I would love to watch another one of these. This has been amazing. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thank you guys.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, when Mariah and I talked earlier this week, there's just been so much going on, with just making this low impact and, you know, something that's just enjoyable.
It's high impact, Jennifer.
Sorry,
It's low intensity.
but it's low impact as far as no stress involved, no homework due, just a couple sentences. But again, those couple sentences in those feedback surveys, they've been really, really powerful. And I think the things that have been really standing out for me from the webinar feedback was just how transformative, you know, kind of just rethinking our relationship with living things and our connectedness to living things, and you know, basically those native values. And it means a lot to me to read through your feedback. Preschoolers will love making these cookies. Yes, they will. We all feel like we are just hanging out in your kitchen chatting. Yep.
The fun thing about doing in-person classes and stuff like that is that there's so much fun conversations that occur after the end of everything. And like, I'm cleaning up and then I get to talk to everybody. So I'm sorry that we don't get to have that formal space here.
You're welcome to hang out as we talk through some of our resources and all of that. Oh my goodness, I just had, speaking of sunflowers, I just had a huge male red-winged blackbird just land on the sunflower feeder and flirt with a little lady who was on the other side of the feeder, and his red shoulders just popped out. I have all my feeders right in front of my window, so I can, when I'm on all of these Zoom calls for work, I'm not looking at the camera, I'm looking slightly above at all my birds, which here I've been actually watching the screen. But you know, for some of those meetings when you're having meeting after meeting after meeting and lots of people are just talking, it's really nice just to watch the birds. I actually had 67 species fly through my little oases of a yard here in just this past year, through offering them water and, like I said, water, shelter, and different types of foods. They've loved my sunflowers, which were all, thank you birds, they were all volunteer sunflowers last year, but I have a whole bunch of seeds that I harvested and I'm hoping to get some. Oh my gosh, that's not fair.
So I wanted to share the soup with you guys so you were able to see our final creation.
Oh, that's beautiful. Absolutely.
Of that. And then of course, as I just inhaled a lot of ginger as I opened the lid to this. And then of course our little sunflower seed cookies.
Oh, those are awesome.
So these are super yummy. You can see I flipped one a little bit too hard. It just totally fell apart on me. So that can sometimes happen.
Sometimes happen.
So
Oh,
I'm going to.
Any questions before we let Mariah start her weekend, and then we can have some teacher chat. Any last questions?
I'm fighting with my tripod. I'm sorry, guys.
I just appreciate this so much, Mariah, especially since you aren't at home and you're not in your own kitchen. And I hope that this soup goes to nourish your family and support them, and certainly sending you all really positive vibes. And I'm glad you're there.
Oh, thank you guys so much. And thank you guys for sharing the space.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Great information shared. This was amazing. Thank you so much. And I'll be, of course, sharing all of the feedback with you next week. So stay
and you guys, if you need to find more recipes or looking for more resources, you can go to indigikitchen.com or IndigiKitchen at Facebook or Instagram or YouTube or whatever, and you can find more recipes and stuff there.
Fabulous. Well, if you all want to stay on, if you're teachers, please feel free to stay on and we can hang out and chat about some resources. Thank you, Mariah. Thank you so much. Well, that was fun. That was super fun. You're all welcome to come off mute now. I'm actually going to stop the recording. So